Well, how is everybody? Pretty good today? Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. It is actually a pleasure to introduce today's LubeTrends live panel session on behalf of Chevron Oronite. As a proud sponsor, Chevron Oronite is committed to supporting the lubricant industry through these dynamic times. As we turn our attention to today's topic, we appreciate the opportunity to hear from our panel and about how the latest trade policy developments may affect the lubricants market, as I think we've seen in the last 2 days. If you haven't watched the market, right? So the LubeTrends Live Town Hall is your opportunity to get an update on these important industry issues, but also to weigh in with your questions and share your insights. After our moderator, ILMA CEO Holly Alfano, gets the discussion going, be ready with some good questions for our panelists. We're happy to have a broad range of expertise on our panel from both inside and outside of ILMA. So Dean Froney, Dean, there you go, is the president and CEO of a Master Fluid Solutions. He has spent his career in increasing levels of responsibility in both automotive and metalworking industries, while leading strategy, operations, sales, and marketing for North America, Europe, and China-based companies. He also serves on the ILMA Board of Directors. Jeff Leiter, there you go. Jeff really needs no introduction with this group. I think everybody knows him. He's been ILMA's legal counsel for over 4 decades and is currently a shareholder at the law firm of Bassman, Mithsell, Alfano, no relation? A little bit, and Leiter. He also serves as legal counsel for the Petroleum Packaging Council and the NLGI, the National Lubricating Grease Institute. Jeff is widely recognized as a leading legal authority on health and safety, environmental, and a range of other legal and regulatory issues affecting the lubricants industry. Last, we have Geoff Moody. Jeff, there you go. Is Senior Vice President of the Government Relations and Policy with the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, AFPM, which I know is a real big show, right? And we attended that one as well. Leads AFPM's federal and state advocacy on issues impacting the refining and petrochemical industries, including fuels, environmental regulation, trade, transportation, infrastructure, chemical management, and tax policy. He started his career on Capitol Hill and has spent more than 15 years working in various policy and energy and environmental advocacy roles. And last but not least, ILMA CEO Holly Alfano will moderate the discussion. So let's please welcome our LubeTrends panel with a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chevron Oronite. They have been our sponsor of this is the 5th year. So LubeTrends is a great educational resource for the members. We regularly host virtual LubeTrends sessions, and Chevron Oronite has been our partner from the beginning, so thank you for that. I feel like we need to start out this morning by all taking a deep breath. Breathe in and breathe out, because it has been a whirlwind of activity over the last couple of days, and it's been really interesting to be here and talk to the members about what this all means. I don't think anybody really knows. It's going to take some time for the dust to settle. But this morning, we're gonna try our best to forecast what it's going to look like over the next few months and what we're dealing with. And ILMA, we're going to try to keep the discussion apolitical. I don't know, we'll try, right? We support sensible regulation that protects consumers and supports a level playing field for everyone. And one of our main objectives, of course, is to advocate for the interests of our membership and the lubricants industry overall. Uncertainty is not in anyone's best interest. We know that's tough. It's tough for business to deal with uncertainty, and I know that it's been a rough ride for a while now. But we're gonna try our best to delve in and see where we end up. we have been hearing about the topic of tariffs in the ILMA office for a while. And now it's kind of all come to a head, and it's one of the biggest sources of uncertainty. And even though, decision Liberation Day came and went, we still, are trying to figure out what this all means for the lubricants industry. So, Dean, I guess I'll start with you because you're in the trenches as the head of a lubricant manufacturing company. How do you think, or how has the tariff situation been affecting your company and your supply chains?
Well, first of all, I think the metalworking fluid and lubricant business is really a highly resilient business. So I think everyone in this room has been through global pandemic, global supply chain crisis, lots of different impacts on the business that have changed the way we go about looking at things, and also really forced us to do a lot of localization over the last 5 years. So not downplaying the impact of this is very significant, but I think the businesses in this room and in our industry are prepared to manage this. What we look at in the beginning is not to take our eye off of our core competencies, right? So we still have to manage the business day to day. The business is about people and relationships and essentially products. So as we started to look at tariffs, we wanted to make sure we didn't take our eye off of our long-term strategy, right? So this is something that's going to be there for a while, but we've got a long-term strategy and a long-term plan that we want to continue to make sure that we move down. Regarding the tariffs, we started modeling various scenarios probably back in February. I would say that, I'm glad we did them on a spreadsheet because we didn't realize this pure magnitude of how many countries are involved now and the percentages. So we have a view of what the impact of our business could be, but at this point, there's some critical raw materials that we're not going to be able to avoid those tariffs, and that's where the hard decisions come in, right? Are you going to pass portions of that on to your customers, and how are you going to manage through that? And like you said, it's still a moving target for us. I think we know our range of exposure, but it's pretty significant.
Jeff Leiter, we talked yesterday a little bit about the tariff situation and how it's affecting the lubricants industry. Would you mind just giving a little update to everyone on that?
Sure, Holly. Good morning, everyone. In terms of the announcement that was made by the president in the Rose Garden on Wednesday, I think the breadth of what he imposed in terms of these universal tariffs across the board at 10% and then targeting 57 specific countries for additional tariffs was beyond what most folks had expected. I mean, certainly the market reacted yesterday and is reacting today to what the impact of this could be, as well as the heightened uncertainty going forward. In essence, what the president said was that for across the board, starting tonight at midnight, this 10% kicks in. Importantly for folks in the room here, the president excluded energy and energy products from these new tariffs. There's an Annex 2 that was attached to his executive order. Caitlin sent the annex out to everyone last night. It's 37 pages, not only of petroleum-related products, but other products as well that they decided would be exempt from these tariffs. So you're looking at virtually most of the finished products you have as not being subject to import duties when you bring them in. There's a couple of exceptions. First piece is go look at that annex. Look at the tariff headings, the subheadings that your products typically come in at, and make sure they're on the list. Proper tariff classification has become very, very critical. But if you're bringing products in from Canada or Mexico, those are still subject to the tariff impositions that the president made a few weeks ago. So energy products coming in from Canada are at 10%, and certainly from Mexico are 25%. ILMA did go to customs a few weeks ago because the White House didn't say what is covered or what's an energy product coming in from Canada. And so in response to ILMA's request, Customs and Border Protection did issue guidance. So it really is getting into the weeds with your freight forwarders, your brokers, and making sure you've got everything properly classified. And lastly, if you bring product in from either Mexico or Canada and it's USMCA compliant, then it comes in at zero. So that's certainly a big incentive to make sure that those products, I know some folks have talked about the hassles of country of origin designation on those products, but it does make sense to at least see if you can get those in at zero.
Thank you. The auto industry, can we just touch on that? Maybe Dean or Jeff, one of you, what are we hearing? What can we expect with that?
It's they're all going to have high levels of complexity. I think this is probably the most complex. They have some coverage with the USMCA agreement, but I think, unfortunately, the suppliers at that industry are most likely going to get a little bit of squeeze. So they've got international tariffs on import vehicles, which should theoretically give some room for GM and Stellantis to probably increase some prices. But I think consumers are smart enough, unless they really need a vehicle, to kind of wait that piece out. All of those companies are still burning significant cash with their EV investments. So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pushback on any type of tariff pass-through on that end. Mm-hmm. Again, back to just the levels of uncertainty. I read this morning that Ford actually is going to offer customer or employee-based pricing on almost all their vehicles until the beginning of June. So they're actually theoretically lowering pricing right now. Stellantis is laying people off, and GM is bringing people on board. So again, okay. I think it's too early to tell, but I do think with that industry and just the overall pricing pressures, that is probably the hardest area to pass through tariffs right now.
Sure. Geoff Moody, what are AFPM's priorities right now?
It depends on the day. Well, first of all, thank you for being here, or thank you for allowing me to be here. Maybe just to add one thing to Jeff's, I completely agree with everything Jeff said. We did hear yesterday, for what it's worth, USTR is starting to put in a process to get additional exemptions onto that Annex 2. And so there's going to be a process. So if you have something that you want exempt, there will be a process to engage with USTR on that. So maybe a little bit of sunshine there coming. Generally, we have a list of probably 40 things we're working on this year. Tariffs over the last 2 days has been a big one. We spent a lot of time over the last 2 months really driving home the impact of energy and the fact that we need feedstock and to feed the refineries in the U.S. And so we were happy that was exempted, and we'll see where that goes. I would say congressionally, we have this multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation package and all the business taxes involved with that, as well as the fate of the Inflation Reduction Act. Is probably the biggest congressional issue this year, at least for the next 6 months. Longer term congressionally, TSCA, I know is important to this group, yes. Is up for, the fees in that program are actually up for reauthorization. They run out next year. So we have an opportunity now to get some statutory changes. And so we've already been working on that. We had an opportunity to testify in front of the first hearing of the year, actually, was in Energy and Commerce, and that was on TSCA reform. So we're hopeful to see that move forward. On the Trump 2.0, the name of the game is tariffs and the deregulatory environment. So I think we submitted something like 40 sets of comments last year.
Wow.
And most of them not happy with what the previous administration was doing. So we've been engaging with all the EPA offices, transportation, DHS, to get some of those moving back the other direction. We want to avoid that full pendulum. We don't want no regulation. I think we completely agree with the reasonable regulation, but it has to be achievable, cost-effective, and actually do what it's intending to do. So those are some big picture. I'm happy to dive in anywhere specific, but those are some of the big picture ones.
Well, we touched on taxes. You mentioned taxes, and for ILMA, the two things that we really care about, the R&D tax credit and the 199A, which is the qualified business income deduction. Any thoughts on where that might be headed?
So it's a good question. Let me preface this with saying it's predicated on whether you can see a reconciliation bill getting done or not.
Right.
And so I think that's a big question mark. And so I'm going to put more uncertainty into your uncertainty. But,
Yeah.
The Senate tonight is starting their vote-a-rama on their budget resolution, which is positive progress. We won't get too far into the weeds, but they've adopted what they call a current policy baseline, which, without getting into all the details, allows them to spend a lot more money without actually putting it on the books.
Okay.
So that will get through the Senate, but the House, the fiscal hawks in the House are really skeptical about that. And this is the first time in history where we've had unified party control of Congress with a narrower margin in the House than in the Senate. We have only 2 votes, I think, now in the House with those special elections. That means Speaker Johnson can only lose 2 votes on any given package. Leader Thune can lose up to 4. We have members of the House acting like members of the Senate usually do, and so we have this group that'll say, I'm not going to vote for that. So we'll see. When Trump comes in and starts to put pressure on those House members, maybe. But
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. If they get one done, I think those 2 provisions stand a really good chance of getting in. In prepping for this conversation, I was doing some call rounds yesterday, and the R&D credit, I think, stands a good chance, maybe not retroactively, but prospectively. So the thought is maybe not going back to 2022 when those changes came in, but prospectively looks pretty good. And then 199A, I think, will be okay. If we're into a situation where reconciliation doesn't get done, though, we're back into extending those TCJA, the Trump tax cuts, with the need for Democratic support, and you should be looking at things like means testing for Democrats to support the 199A extension. So that's where I think we're standing, but that's a big $5 trillion question this year.
Right. Okay. Jeff Leiter, did you have any thoughts on either of those?
Well, I think Jeff has covered it well. I mean, this vote-a-rama this weekend, this baseline that they've adopted basically says you can extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017 and it wouldn't cost anything, is the way I understand the process.
Yep.
Most of these votes that you'll hear about in the news media over the weekend, it's 50 hours of debate. Most of those amendments really aren't going to go anywhere. I think in the long term, it's just folks staking positions on different issues. The other, on the personal side, most of the tax cuts expire for individuals at the end of the year. The other one that we've been commenting on as well is the estate tax, keeping it back to the levels that were so it doesn't revert back to the lower pre-2017 levels. Trump right now looks like he's going to get his big, beautiful bill. All things happening. You'll see Rand Paul in the Senate be the one that's going to object to everything. He's a fiscal hawk, and I think the fiscal hawks in the Republican side, at $5 trillion, I think it's about a $400 billion interest charge over 5 years, I think, Jeff?
Like that, yeah.
It's a pretty big number at this point. But
We mentioned deregulation. We saw over the last 4 years an onslaught of regulations that was really unprecedented, and now the president, through executive order and other means, is rolling those back. Jeff Leiter, one of the ways that they're rolling back regulations is through the Congressional Review Act. Can you kind of explain to people here how that works?
Sure. The Congressional Review Act, otherwise known as CRA, is a tool that the Republican Congress passed in 1996 to have effectively Congress nullify regulations promulgated by the executive branch. There's two key components to the rule in terms of every time an agency like EPA or OSHA finalizes a regulation, it gets sent up to Capitol Hill. Under the statute, Congress has 60 legislative days, which does not equate to a calendar day, in order to pass a joint resolution of disapproval. So it requires both the House and the Senate. It's not subject to the 60-vote filibuster limit in the Senate, and then it would go to the President. The second is, which is critical right now for the Trump administration undoing a lot of the Biden climate agenda, is a look-back window. Effectively, any rule that was finalized by the Biden administration since the middle of last August is subject as well to these resolutions of disapproval. As of today, there are over 60 that have been introduced in both the House and the Senate. About just a little less than, a little over a third target EPA, but there's some spattering among the rest of the agencies. Interestingly, probably from ILMA's perspective, the one that, and I know from AFPM's perspective as well, that we're watching very closely, is in the middle of December, the Biden administration's EPA approved a waiver under the Clean Air Act for California known as Advanced Clean Car Rule Number 2. Effectively, this is the rule in California that requires 100% sales of zero-emission vehicles in the state by 2035. A number of states, they call them 177 states, about a dozen have said if California implements this, we'll do it too. New York, for example, Massachusetts, a number of other states have said we'll tag on to that rulemaking. EPA has sent that waiver approval up to Capitol Hill. There have been resolutions of disapproval introduced. Interestingly, the General Accountability Office has opined twice that says that that's not a rule. It's not subject to the Congressional Review Act review. I will tell you that there's a number of lawyers in D.C. I've taken analysis of it. I've got an opinion that I think Congress can, in fact, look at this within the context of what a rule means in the statute. But certainly this is going to be a major play. So the hurdle to get over right now in the Senate, I believe, is they're waiting for the parliamentarian there who carries a lot of weight in terms of whether something's germane, in terms of making a decision as to whether this is a rule or not. But the hope is that the Congress would take this up. It's interesting that the argument in many cases is that EPA has deferred to one state, one small bureaucracy within one state, to dictate national policy with respect to transportation and vehicles. So that's going to be probably the most newsworthy one. In the last couple of days, both the House and Senate have passed resolutions of disapproval on a couple of the commercial refrigerant standards that DOE, Department of Energy, had promulgated. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to comment on the ACC2 thing, but
Happy to. This is
it's near and dear to.
this is yeah. So you asked some of our prior. I didn't get too far into the. I would say just generally preserving competition in the vehicle market and consumer choice is top priority for us. So we want the ACC2 rule. You mentioned other states. That's about 40% of the new auto market. Come 2035, if it stands, you will not be able to buy a gasoline-powered car in those 12 states right now, but poised to grow. Jeff is absolutely correct on everything. There was this GAO report. I've been in contact with the chief counsel, Thune's chief counsel multiple times over the last couple of weeks. They're trying to argue that GAO has no role here. This is purely congressional prerogative to review rules of national applicability, which they argue it is. It meets all. So we think it's subject to it. We think that EPA has done the correct thing in sending it over. We're looking forward to getting a vote in both the House and the Senate. The House introduced earlier this week. The Senate will introduce today, and I think they're setting up votes for right after the Easter recess. So we're looking forward to getting those off the books and moving on to the next. But ladders into a broader issue about how you start to roll back some of the Biden era vehicle rules, because of course California went to 100%. President Biden is a nationwide rule. that it was 2/3 of new cars would have to be battery electric by 2032. So that's the other big one we're working on.
And what's the status of that one?
That one, so President Trump, day one, actually minute 12 of his inauguration speech said, I'm going to eliminate the electric vehicle mandate. And he was talking about multiple of these. But that night, one of his first executive orders was on energy. It was directing EPA on the tailpipe, and then NHTSA on the CAFE standards to go and reconsider those rules. So they're going to be doing that. EPA 3 weeks ago released their first kind of 31 deregulatory initiatives. The vehicle rules were on that list. So they're just kind of in the process of figuring out how they're going to go about it. And it brings in some broader questions. So they're also re-examining the 2009 endangerment finding, basically that it was President Obama came out and found post-mass VPA that greenhouse gases from tailpipes endanger the environment. And therefore, EPA has the ability to regulate them or the responsibility to regulate them. They're going to go back and take a look at that original endangerment finding. So that has a lot of implications for how they go about rewriting these rules as well. But it's complicated and mixed up. But yeah, that's going to be a top priority for EPA this year.
Holly, if I could add one thing back on the Congressional Review Act that I failed to mention. Once Congress were to pass a joint resolution disapproval, the president signs it, it bars the agency from promulgating effectively a substantially similar rule in the future. So that becomes the issue then becomes what does that mean in terms of, there's been some past GAO interpretations of that, but it certainly becomes, with Chevron deference now gone, a significant tool for, I'll call it our side in terms of arguing, you just can't go back to the same place again. And then on the deregulatory side, I mean, Trump as well wants to undo the EV mandates. He's talked about one new rule requires 10 to be rescinded, and certainly that's a significant opportunity in a number of other programs within EPA where the agency's probably going to back off some of the things that if Biden was still there, they'd be doing.
Dean, when you hear all this discussion, what do you take away from it as a business owner?
There's a lot out there. I think on the whole EPA situation, things are obviously going to slow down. I can't imagine they're going to completely reverse. One of the fears, I think as Jeff mentioned, is if these things start to go to the states and you've got just multiple regulations that you've got to deal with. On the EV mandate side, there's just been so much investment already made. So again, it'll be nice not to have a mandate, but those hybrids and EVs are going to continue, probably at a slower pace. But I think the big three at least have already, that ship has sailed, right? They're fully committed. I do think it's important because just spending time in Asia, about 4 out of every 10 vehicles are EV already. So they've got a significant lead on that market for years to come. So I don't know that the other companies will ever catch them, but I think it's important to continue. I think more on the hybrid side of things, but yeah, I think that investment's going to continue.
I think if I could jump in on that
sure.
one point, I think China, you're absolutely right. 90% of the critical minerals you need for those batteries run through China, right? So our point to the U.S. policymakers has been, we're the largest refining industry in the world. We're the largest oil and gas producer in the world. Why would we trade those God-given advantages for dependence on China and play into that? So we're talking about mobility and energy additionality, right? So we're going to need more of all of this. So if China wants to take advantage of its mineral resources and its capacity to do that, great. For us, we should be focused on preserving consumer choice. So that's been how we've kind of bridged that. It's not, we don't need to catch up to them.
I agree. I think it's just one piece of a big puzzle.
Yep, for sure.
And on the mineral side, the United States has a wealth of minerals. The problem is we have no processing facilities here. You know, I don't know if that is something that, given this tariff situation, people will look at as a business opportunity. You know, that would really help the United States establish its independence.
Although it takes 30 years to permit a mine in the U.S.
Yeah.
So,
And not to belabor tariffs, Beijing this morning retaliated against
yeah.
Trump and imposed 34% on imports into China, but they also put the 34% on critical minerals, and these are on top of already existing levies. So I know that folks in this room use some of those materials that are on the list today. So, you know, moly is one. So it may be worthwhile taking a look at the Chinese list when you get a break today as well.
A lot to digest. Okay. We've been hearing a lot about DOGE and about the staffing reduction at the different agencies. How is that affecting our members, or is it? Who wants to take a stab at that?
I can start. I would just, so far on the regulatory side, it's not going to start biting until they actually start to write rules.
Okay.
And so they have a very aggressive agenda. It's going to take people to do it. We'll see how durable some of the cuts are.
Yeah.
You know, I know already the Tosca office last week said that they need another 100 people to start processing all these new chemical reviews. So I think it's going to swing back at some point, but until the rubber starts to hit the road on, okay, now we actually have to go start writing. At least from AFPM's side, we haven't really seen it. Individual member companies looking for permits, things like that, might be having a different point of view. But
Yeah.
And I would just add, I mean, there seems to be a generational change, at least at EPA and probably OSHA as well, where a lot of the folks that have worked with us on issues, whether they agreed with us or not, that many of them are retiring. And so you've got a lot of new folks coming in that really don't understand all of the debates that we've had, and it becomes a lift trying to educate them on the one hand, and then, you know, them dealing with the political folks that they're dealing with at the same time.
yeah.
We touched on Tosca implementation, and I know we've seen some changes in the works that began even before Trump took office. What's happened so far? Jeff Leiter, you want to jump on that?
Well, I mean, there's different pieces to this. You know, first, Jeff mentioned this legislation on fees. We expect that Congress is going to address the fee issue. EPA probably will get less in the way of fees going forward. And the fees are supposed to help support the work that the agency does in the chemicals program. There's probably some administrative pieces that now with Chevron deference gone, that is an opportunity Republicans to fix in statute. So there'll be a bill, you know, just how far it goes this year or into the next year remains to be seen. So that's piece one. You get over, Trump has said that they intend to keep up the pace with issuing reviews of new chemicals. I'm not sure how they can do it with the reduced staff that they have. They'll continue to rely on significant new use rules in order to keep the program moving. I think there'll be some change in priorities on chemicals from the Biden administration in terms of existing chemicals and how they evaluate those under the existing statutory framework. Kind of the wild card is PFAS and what's happening, but that goes across the agency, not only TSCA, Community Right to Know, Superfund, the various programs all have some piece in dealing with that chemical, range family of chemicals. But you know, it's a challenge, and I mean, again, the woman who ran the chemicals program through Biden was instrumental in writing the statute back in 2016, and so they're going back and trying to protect that territory as well. So it's going to be a significant debate in this area. But in terms of what I've been telling ILMA members is just you know, keep on plugging away with what you're doing in terms of new chemicals, and you know, it'll work through the system. It's just going to take a while.
Dean, what would a change in TSCA implementation mean for your business?
Depends on what it is and how quick it would happen. I think it's going to slow down, and so approval of new materials is critical. I think from a regulatory standpoint, it's going to slow down, which won't be a terrible thing. But I think it's just something that we're going to have to manage over time. I don't know that it's going to have too much of an impact on us in the short term, but we'll just see how things play out.
Okay. We've talked a lot at this meeting about chlorinated paraffins and about some of the restrictions that EPA's considered, and do we think those will be walked back, Jeff?
I'm not sure walk back is right. I mean, they were on EPA's TSCA plan. EPA, under Biden, ILMA had commented last year saying that you've got this robust analysis of chlorinated paraffins. You really don't need to give it priority. So it fell out of the top 10 for EPA in terms of existing chemical evaluations. I think what we're looking at more so is the impact of what's happening in Europe, where they're looking to restrict mid-chains over a 10-year period of time, basically forcing them out of existence. Canada is now looking at it. And I think with the weight of all of that, I think, puts pressure on EPA here, but it's going to be a while. And we continue to make the case that if you take away that material, this is what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to make parts for airplanes as effectively. You're not going to make heart stents and medical devices that depend on these fluids. There's a range of things that just won't happen if you take that material off the market. So we're continuing the fight. And folks tell me in this group, if I get rid of chlorine, I can't. I do. But I mean, it's just one material that is just really important. Meanwhile, they're going crazy with it in China and India.
That's true.
Yeah.
OSHA is another agency that our members are very, that has a lot of regulatory authority over our members. And do we think that HCS 2024 will continue as planned, and the timeline for that will stay as we expect, Jeff?
The short answer is yes. I mean, that's outside of the purview of Congressional Review Act. Certainly, the Trump administration has made no mention of doing anything to alter that regulation that was amended last spring.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're moving forward with helping members through ILMA with compliance assistance, and the significant thing is the revisions of the data sheets. OSHA's rules continue to cite that this group or this industry has about 40% of the data sheets that need to be reviewed, and about a quarter of the compliance costs. So it is an important regulatory burden for the folks here, but certainly something that we're working on.
What about OSHA's heat standard and the walk-around rule that we talked about? The heat standard, can you just explain real quick what the status of that is?
Yeah, so for years, decades, OSHA has relied on its general duty clause to enforce heat, injury, and illness problems in workplaces. California and a few other states started promulgating their own regulations in this area. Biden thought, both with climate change and his view towards unions, that this would be a wonderful rule to put in place. OSHA embarked on a rulemaking process, published a rule for comment last fall. ILMA commented extensively on that rule in December, telling the agency that a one-size-fits-all answer doesn't really work, and you should give more flexibility, particularly to smaller companies. You got to look at geography, where it might not be over 80 degrees 100 days a year like it might be here in Coachella Valley. Clearly, the expectation is that the Trump administration will, if they don't rescind the rule or the proposal, will just not do anything with it. But what we've been telling folks is, keep in mind that you have a number of state OSHAs that are approved by the federal OSHA to operate in lieu of the federal program. And then other states that are not OSHA plan states that have gone ahead. There's legislation pending in Rhode Island right now, Arizona, a handful of other states, Maryland, for example, have all adopted some form of a heat standard within the last year. So this is one that's going to shift over to the states and kind of take over there. On the walk-around rule, this is one where if OSHA comes in to do an inspection, the OSHA inspector at his or her discretion can allow a third party, a union organizer, plaintiff's attorney, some other non-company person to walk in and accompany that person on a walk-around inspection of the facility. That rule was promulgated. It's been challenged in court. The litigation is pending. There's the possibility that rule could be withdrawn by the Trump administration, but we'll see where it goes with respect to the litigation. Lastly, one other rule, Holly, is folks are familiar with the injury and illness. Every year you've got to post the summaries in your workplace for everybody to see. Certain companies were required, not with necessarily an ILMA, but high hazard industries and others with over a certain number of employees, to report electronically to OSHA your injury and illnesses. Biden made a data dump of 2023 by facility. I mean, intimate details of these things was made public in December. The expectation is that Trump will, that's the last data dump that you'll see, that they'll pull back on this public reporting of what you've electronically submitted.
Sure.
On heat, I think OSHA is also doing a kind of informal hearing in June on that. So there's opportunity, I think, still to weigh in.
That's good to know. I'm going to ask another question, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys. So we'll give you a minute to think about what questions you'd like to ask the panelists. But I thought since Geoff Moody is with us, I'd like to just touch on energy policy for a minute. And, you know, what does drill, baby, drill really mean for manufacturers?
So what I would say is affordable energy is good for the U.S. manufacturing base, period, right? So companies have opportunities to site facilities anywhere in the world to do business. We have a huge manufacturing advantage in the U.S. because of energy. It's energy cost and access to feedstock, and I mean, that's why you see the investment coming here. You know, we're hopeful President Trump and expect President Trump to keep following through on his promise for energy dominance in the U.S. Oil prices are not high right now, you know, especially with the tariffs over the last couple of days. So not a lot of incentive for new production to come online. So I think there's going to be a tension there worth watching. But just in general, more energy, more access, pipelines to get it to places where it needs to be, and then using that as soft power around the world is, I think, critical. So, I mean, don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, I think it does, actually. So, so I wanted to open it up to the group here. What are your questions for the panelists? We've got mic runners, so you can just raise your hand, and we will run a mic over to you. Okay, Richard, up here.
Just a question. Just a question regarding the energy-related items, base oils and so forth, that were exempted. I think you brought that up in your talk yesterday. What actually is covered under that? Would say waxes and mixtures like that be also covered under energy items that would not be subject to the tariffs for incoming?
Again, the administration through Customs and Border Protection they take the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States, and they have 37 pages that came out on Wednesday that says these are considered energy and energy products, as well as other materials that they've decided to exempt. So it really is, to the extent you're bringing products in and you know what your tariff heading or subheading is, you really just got to match it up to see if it's covered. With Canada, for example, they came up with a much more narrow list of materials. And when I talked to Customs and then the U.S. Trade Rep small business person, they were just, at that point, they didn't know what was going on, So, but you really need to look at the material if you're bringing in and see if it's properly classified and make sure that, see if it fits within one of those categories. Jeff mentioned that there's a process opening up to go back, and usually there's a issue when you enter a product through Customs and they liquidate the entry and they collect it. You can challenge the determination at that point. It's a process. But to the extent there's a way to just say, we think this should be on the list. We had argued to Customs, for example, that some materials that are raw materials meet the definition largely because they're either included with diluent, that's mostly petroleum, or that they are derived from petrochemical feedstocks and therefore should fall within the definition. And in some instances, Customs initially agreed on Canadian products, and others they said no. But I'd go back through that tariff classification. That's going to be the roadmap to see right now.
I see Stefan's hand over here. Stefan, would you raise your hand so the mic runners can, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. What's not clear to me, the exemption, is it only for US and for Canada and Mexico, also for other regions of the world? And does this include only base oils and lubricants, but also certain chemicals to formulate lubricants?
So again, most greases are covered by the exemption. What Trump said on Wednesday applied to everywhere in the world but Mexico and Canada. And so this 10%, and then the exemption for energy and energy products was global. But then to the extent you're bringing in energy products from Mexico, it's at 25%. Canada would be at 10, and if not 10, it's 25, unless it's at USMCA compliant. So the question becomes, where do you fit in the Canadian scheme? And that, again, goes back to these tariff classifications. But if I'm bringing in a finished lubricating oil from the EU, I mean, if it fits in within that list on the 37 pages, it comes in at 0 under this new reciprocal tariff scheme. Chemicals that would formulate the products, again, you got to go back and look specifically whether that chemical additive is on the list or not.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Stefan? I see one over here.
Hi. You had talked about Tosca earlier and how you expected things to kind of slow down, I guess. My question was, there are some requirements in terms of waiting periods, 90 days and things like that for chemical submissions and things. Are you indicating that those waiting periods will get extended, or when you say things will slow down, or what exactly do you mean? I'm not sure who to ask that question to. But.
I mean, under Biden, when the statute was amended through Trump 1 and then into Biden, you submit a pre-manufacture notice, a PMN. Typically, the agency under the statute is supposed to resolve it within 90 days. Typically, it slid past 90 days. There was quite a backlog, which finally was reduced, but there's still a backlog. And the agency then would enter into known as 5E consent orders or issue significant use rules to kind of get around it at that particular point. I expect that to continue. There is a database that you can access to see where things sit in the queue. But in terms of slowing down, they don't have as many people. They're not going to have the resources with the fees. And they're short bodies now. So, it looks like it's going to take longer to get them through.
Yeah, I think my only caveat is if Congress comes in and amends the fees legislation and puts some actual teeth to that 90-day timeline, because then maybe, but I agree.
Richard.
It's a bit, probably for Dean, most appropriate. We're going to have some interesting conversations with the end users of our products. And we're going to have those conversations probably pretty quick. Question is, how transparent are we going to be with our customers and say, no, the tariff number for these raw materials was this, or I can't get this product, to avoid any kind of freak out on their end? Just how, in your opinion, or the level of transparency of these conversations?
In the past, with everything else we've dealt with over 5 years, we've been very transparent with our channel partners and customers, and to the point where sometimes we were the first ones having that communication, which makes it a little bit more difficult, but I think at the end you get some benefits because they realize that you came in first, right? You warned them, they said no one else is coming in, and then we say, well, they will, right? Because everyone's using these same critical raw materials. And so it actually, tough conversations, but it actually helped us build those relationships over time. They said, well, we're glad you had these discussions. I do think with any of these things, there's a period of time where you're just gonna have to wait and try and really plan and see where things go. Again, I do think that the China tariffs are probably the ones that are gonna stick the longest just because of all of the friction there. Again, it's anybody's guess, but I think at this point, we're starting to see some raw material cost pressures, but I think it's gonna be a month or two before anyone's really gonna consider having those conversations with us.
And one of the comments from the lawyer's perspective, Richard, is you've got supply contracts, agreements with the customers. Typically under the case law in most states, economic is becoming less of a good deal for you as a seller because of these costs. Doesn't qualify typically for a force majeure provision, but there are some ways to look at your contracts in terms of, is there a provision in there for tariff changes, particularly with a lot of overseas shipments? Are there provisions there where you start talking to the customer about perhaps splitting some of these? I mean, there's ways that you can look at this through the contract to kind of mitigate the erosion of your margins at that point. But so, I'd take a hard look at your agreements and talk to your own counsel and look internally. Are there some things there as part of the transparency with the customers that you can work around?
I see, I think that's Mike. I can't see, the light is in my eyes, but Mike, do you have a question?
Yes, and I don't know if this is fair, but obviously there's been a lot going on since January 20th, certainly. But specifically to the tariffs, which has been headlines this week, do you have an opinion on what the likely outcome might be, maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, or even beyond that?
Wow, that's a.
I know it's not fair, but
Who's got the crystal
We
ball?
don't have a crystal ball up here, but I don't know. What do y'all think?
Let me try it this way. I think probably, at least for the near term, and I'm saying 4 years, globalization is probably on the decline. When you read the papers in Washington, a lot of the policy journals that Jeff and I see daily, there's been a debate, I'll call it healthy for the lack of a better term, but a debate among Trump's advisors. Are we looking to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? Are we looking to get money to pay for the tax bill? Are we looking to deal with illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking, and how much of the Chinese tariffs are tied to you got to shut off the opioid funnel to the U.S.? So you have a lot of these competing policy considerations, and they all sit in front of the president in the Oval Office, or if they're in whatever conference room in the White House, and they present all these different options to them. I think leading up to Wednesday's announcement, the day or two before, is, well, he might just do this, he might do that, and they ended up doing both in terms of reciprocal and universal. And I mean, so it's hard to say just what's the policy consideration that is in Trump's head that particular day, probably. I don't see, I mean, the question is, let's say like Nike, for example, how much of their sneakers come from Vietnam? I mean, the news this morning was Vietnam wants the deal. They want to go to zero tariffs. So if they do a deal with Vietnam and they go to zero, does that solve the problem? You know, maybe, the long answer is, your guess is as good. I mean, I don't have an over-under that I'd take to Vegas right now. But I think it's fair that I think that this is going to take a little bit longer than probably most people figured to play out. And clearly the market's reacting to it the last 2 days.
I agree. I think the only thing I'd add, President Trump is, I don't think I'm going too far on a limb, doesn't have that many core beliefs, like, political beliefs. Tariffs are one of them. He bought a New York Times ad in 1987 talking about the need to tariff because it was Japan at the time. But this has been consistent for 40 years for him. So, so getting him off of that, I think, is challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing is if he can get a win with a country, then he's going to take that win, but it's going to be one by one.
He did warn us. He did
Yeah.
say he was going to do it. He got elected, and he's doing what he said he would do, like it or not. But anyway, we did
But I
have
guess when he
questions.
said he'd make America wealthy again,
Yeah.
I guess it's your 401ks bouncing back from where they are today.
Buy the dip.
The other point I've told folks here at the meeting has been, he told you he was going to do this.
Yeah.
He's doing what he told you he's going to do. And nobody, I guess people believed him, but they didn't think he was going to go as far as he did, particularly on the tariffs.
There's a question over here. Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Leitner, with the 12 states that are proposing the zero-emission vehicles by 2032, 2035,
I mean, Jeff probably can spit them out off the top of his head better than I can. But,
yeah. But my question is, with automotive manufacturing being dispersed throughout the whole United States and mostly not in those 12 states, would the interstate commerce clause come into play with that at all?
The Commerce Clause in the Constitution is probably one that has been dead for a while and is being resurrected in certain instances. There are a number of legal challenges to the various Biden emission rules and the California waivers that have been granted by EPA.
We're in the Supreme Court on one of them later this month, actually.
Yeah, the one on ACC 1 right now depends on what they'll do with the Supreme Court. I mean, there's a standing issue. I mean, it's a procedural legal argument where the D.C. Circuit said that the petitioners, which included Jeff's group, didn't have standing because the automakers couldn't give them a remedy. And they're like, so that's before the Supremes I'm not sure when the argument's been.
I think it's the 23rd, if I'm remembering correctly.
But in terms of the states, I don't think Commerce Clause in any of the lawsuits, I don't remember seeing it.
We've been major question doctrine, the West Virginia Supreme Court case from last year, 2 years ago. Is kind of the lead argument there, and then there's actually statutory arguments on the Clean Air Act. There's specific criteria that the waiver has to meet, including extraordinary and compelling local circumstances. So for California, that was smog in the 1970s. That's why the provision's there. It's not to address global climate change. So we have a statutory hook, and then we think clearly with the major question doctrine and Loper, which is the death of the Chevron deference, that we have a really good argument if we can get there. The problem is, we've sued on every one of these over the last 10 years. We've never been able to get to the Supreme Court because it switches and then things get put, they get reconsidered. So our whole goal here is to get to the Supreme Court and to get resolution on this question because this just isn't working as it's going right now. So we're keeping this ACC 1, which is the last set of rules. It's a lower mandate, but it's the same legal questions. If we can get standing on that, it goes back to the D.C. Circuit. The D.C. Circuit will almost certainly rule against us on the merits, but then we're back in front of the Supreme Court on ACC 1. So,
Do we have any other questions? Anybody else? Okay. Well, this was great. I really want to thank our panelists. This is a great discussion that we had. I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. And we will be convening right back here in this room for the first ILMA Express Talk. I was going to say 10 minutes. It's probably more like 20 minutes from now. And it will feature Argus, which will be providing an overview of the U.S. base oils market. So I look forward to seeing you then. And I just want to thank, once again, I want to thank Chevron Ornite for partnering with us on LubeTrends. Thank you all for joining us.